thank you all for coming. Wow, we filled the place. Pretty close. Yeah. So, anyhow, 2022. Can you believe it? I mean,
here we are.
2019 and 2020 were the longest decade of my life. I think we all can relate, but I don't know. There just seems to be a little bit more air of optimism starting this year. Maybe it's just a new year, or I don't know. But anyhow, I'm glad you're all here because I mean, between the wildfires and COVID and the drought, and you know, people's wages have been cut and loss of weight. It's been crazy. It's been hard on them. It's been really hard on them. The wildfires have been hard on them. The drought has been hard on them. It's just, they are a bellwether species. As it goes for us, it kind of goes for them. When you really think about it, you go back 100 years. When was this building built?
1906.
Let's jump back. Let's go 1906. Harley Davidson has been around for 3 years. They're still basically a bicycle with a little motor on it. 1906, there were still horse-drawn carriages going through Cedaredge. 1906, we still depended on them more to plow our fields than we did tractors. Tractors were just coming along. So, you know, so actually we're 110 years. But anyhow, the horse was replaced by what? The steam engine, the car, the internal combustion engine. What are we being replaced by? Robots, artificial intelligence. Kids used to play baseball, football, hockey. Used to have grab a kid by the ear and drag him home. Didn't want to be home. Now, kids are in the basement just playing video games. Anyhow, that's just my 2 cents. But it is, sometimes you gotta stop and look. Human progress up until the early 1900s, there is no other species on this planet that we are indebted to. And so many of us have forgotten. So many of us have forgotten. But anyhow, I can get a little emotional. I'm a man. Big boys cry. Big boys can be tough as nails too. But anyhow, the wild horse. I want to start off with history. I just got this picture. And there it went. Hello. Got this picture. This is Romeo. He originally came out of Wyoming, out of Salt Wells, Wyoming, which is outside of Rock Springs, the Rock Springs area. They're very well known for having very large, drafty, big-boned, not what most people think of Mustangs. Mustangs, more times than not, are called range rats. You think of small, scrawny, ornery, little, wiry things. Okay. So, but what we are finding is, again, history of the Mustangs. We're really close. Anybody watching 1883? And it's the wagon train from Texas to Oregon, and it's pretty phenomenal. It's probably the best Western since Lonesome Dove, as far as made for TV. Anyhow, it was these horses that got people to the West Coast. It is these horses that allowed us to populate the West. And there's more and more history. The Old Spanish Trail, which runs through Delta, we have Fort Uncompahgre. Part of the Old Spanish Trail runs through Grand Junction, and it goes, there's all kinds, I got a picture of the Old Spanish Trail. The Oregon Trail, the California Trail, all these trails that led west. Go west, young man, go west, young man. Civil War is over, and now we're expanding west. Very draft, you know, you had to have big solid horses, and draft horses got loose and ran off, and You know, cavalry horses got loose and personal riding horses got loose, and you've got all that. And you know, if you go back and listen to Native Americans' verbal history, you listen to the Native Americans, they're like, no, we had horses before Columbus came. I've got a picture further on in here of hieroglyphics from the Anasazis, of Anasazis riding horseback, hunting deer. The Anasazi were out of the Four Corners area 300 years before Columbus arrived. It's circumstantial evidence, I'm sure somebody can argue, but the possibility is North America was where the horse originated. They may not have all disappeared. Because horses, when you bring in a European, even a Middle Eastern, to ride a horse, you had to be someone of stature. So if we're coming to, if we're coming, hello. Okay, it's back on. So if we're coming on all these ships, whether it be Spaniards, English, French, what have you, and you're trying to convince the kings and the queens back in Europe that there's nothing but savages here, if they were riding horseback, that's a totally different picture. This thing's dying on me. I'm just gonna talk. I got a voice. Horses can hear me 8 acres away if I'm yelling at them and they come running. So anyhow, I'm not saying that that's the true history or not, but there's enough evidence there that there's quite a possibility that our Plains Indians and the Indians up in Canada, Native Americans, I'm still old school, I say Indian, Native Americans, indigenous people, were on horseback when the original Europeans came. I'd like to jump in and find out what the Vikings had to say about that, because we all know the Vikings were here before Columbus. But anyhow, history I love. I was a minor in history through college. I love history, and I love history because it's not static. It evolves. And I'm not talking revisionist history. I'm just saying that, oh wow, there's new information here. We've got to open that window. It's just like science. Science is not hard and fast. Science is always changing and evolving. And what you want, whether it be history, science, or whatever, you have a right to question that stuff. Hey, is that right? With wild horses, there's so many options for fertility control, all these other advances in science that we need to look at that. If we can utilize fertility control and keep these mares on the range, and maybe they have 1 or 2 babies instead of 10 or 12, because once they come off the range, if they're between the age of a foal and a 5-year-old, and they happen to be flashy, they got a pretty good chance of being adopted. If they're 10 years old and they're Bear or Sorrel and no flashiness about them at all, the odds of them getting adopted, really not there. Except for me, I'm suckers for the Harlow case. But anyhow, and I pull him out of it. But anyhow, he's just one I love to share because he was standing in a holding facility in Utah, Axtell, Utah. And I just saw him, and I was like, what's it going to take to get him? And I filled out the paperwork, and 3 weeks later we showed up with a horse trailer and brought him home, along with Clancy, who was his prison buddy. And I didn't even notice Clancy because I was so taken with this guy, but I had pictures and pictures and pictures, and there was this tall bay with white socks, with elf ears, little, tiny little hooked-in ears. And I was just like, I can't leave him behind. Room in the trailer, we'll take them both.
How old is he?
Let's see, Rango is now 11, so he would have been 8, 7 or 8. But what's interesting, I call them prison buddies, because in the BLM system, they keep, every stallion comes in and they're gelded. So they keep the geldings in separate pens, they keep the mares in pens, and then they keep the weanlings and yearlings in a separate pen. I call those Lord of the Fly pens, because there's no adult supervision. And it's one of the bones I'd really like to pick. If you are working for the BLM and you are in the Wild Horse and Burro program, rocking a hard place. Yeah. Some of the finest people I know work in that program and just get chewed up and spit out and beat up. And it's a no-win situation for them. But some of the most difficult horses I've worked with coming out of the BLM are facility-born, the weanlings, and the yearlings that have not been raised as a horse. It's Lord of the Flies. You've got 1-year-olds bossing around weanlings, and anyhow, that's kind of my soapbox. But the BLM really is a rock and hard place, and they're underneath the Department of Interior, and then the Department of Interior has a cabinet position that answers to the president. But it's a tough place to be. I've seen some really good people burn out in that. And it's a shame. It's a tough place to be for wild horses because their reproduction rates, the herds anywhere from 15 to 20% increase per year. So if you have 100 this year, you're going to have 120 next year if you go with a 20% number. Then you take 120 and 20% of 120 is more and more. So it's like 4 to 5 years the herds double. Their land doesn't double. On a good year, they might have more forage. And it's not just the horses out there. Deer, elk, you know, everything. Rabbits, sage grouse. They're all sharing the same range. And then you've got leasing for grazing of sheep and grazing of cattle. And boy, that's a whole can of worms too. But this gentleman here, what's your name?
Greg.
Greg, great name, Greg George.
Mm-hmm.
My best friend in college was Greg. Where's it going? But
With the BLM.
almost every acre out there in the BLM is considered multi-use as public land. That means I have as much right to that land as Greg does, as Rango does, or Romeo, I'm sorry, as a sage grouse does, as somebody that's grazing sheep. And man, it's kind of like scheduling this room. Tricky. And especially, I mean, in a larger city where you've got some venues and you're trying to schedule it and you've got, you know, Wild Horse Talk tonight and tomorrow, you know, Big and Rich are showing up to do a show or whatever. It's a juggling act that I tried to get in that fight and just be pro horse. And I was like, wow, I'm burning all this energy and getting nowhere. And so what I've come to find is if I can help these horses after they've been gathered, if I can help the people that are working with the horses, that are adopting these horses, better understand them, because you look at that picture and you could put another domestic side by side, you may not even know. But when you're with a Mustang, it's a totally different story. Yeah, biologically they're about the same, but they have been, whichever theory, you're talking anywhere from 120 years to hundreds of years to maybe thousands of years. They are a wild animal. There's nothing feral about them. You've been wild for 100 years. I mean, how many generations is that? You know, they're wild. And wild in a good way. We think wild is like, wild is good. America, we need to be wilder. We really do. We have really become so bad. It's just like, just be wild, you know. And And wild isn't, you know, this becoming a mosh pit and me turning up the music to 11. It's wild is just being who you were created to be. And I'm not going to be Greg. Greg's not going to be me. But we can have a conversation. We may not agree on everything. But we can have this conversation. It doesn't have to go to blows, and it doesn't have to be, you know, this love fest either. But there's the way these horses interact is amazing. You think you see the pictures, whether the stallions and they're reared up and they're fighting and all that. A heavyweight fight between Mike Tyson and Vander Holyfield goes, what, 12 rounds? And he loses part of an ear. These guys, 95 to 99% of the time, if they have a conflict, it's settled within 30 seconds. Done. Most of the time it doesn't even come to blows. It's just a little posturing, a little snorting, and away they go. The men do not run the herds. The women do. Kind of like humans. A lot like humans. You know, us guys, we can be tough. We can, you know, go arm wrestling or, you know, get in a little fight or whatever. But it comes down, it is a family, and it's a broad, it starts family, the stallion, the mare, the baby. The stallion may have 3 or 4 mares, or 5 or 6. He doesn't choose the mares. The mares say it's okay for him to choose. It's the mares that say, okay, you're good enough. I'll be part of you. I'll be part of this larger band. The mare says, boy, and when the mare says no, yeah, don't want to get a no from a mare. So, especially a Mustang mare. So anyhow, it's just, I'm supposed to be talking history. And I'm anyhow, let me pop out of here, fire this up. There, history. Okay, I was talking about that petroglyph. That is clearly humans writing. It's got to be a horse. Might too skinny to be a buffalo. I don't know what else would be big enough. And hunting a deer, and that's out of Arizona in their Anasazi territory, and they've, you know, they said yes, that is Anasazi petroglyphs. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. Anasazis disappeared in like 1100, 1200, at least 200 or 300 years before Columbus. So just be open that horses didn't completely disappear from North America. They originated here, they went across the land bridge, they went all through Asia, dropped down into the Arab states. You got your Arabian horse, which they're an incredible breed, incredible breed. They don't like the cold. They don't like the cold at all. But 120-degree summers, they don't mind. But anyhow, it's just the horses, as they have gone through, they adapt to their climate. Look at the Icelandic horses. 80 below zero. They're not wearing a blanket. They might shelter up a little bit. 80 below zero. Imagine what the wind chills are. So the horse is incredible at adapting. Call it evolving or what have you, but they adapt, and they are just phenomenal at it. Okay, so here we are. I wanted to talk about this trail because this is the one that affects us. This is the old Spanish Trail. Santa Fe to Los Angeles, Las Vegas. Don't know if there's gambling going on back in the early 1800s or not. Probably, I don't know. Through Utah. Come on. This thing does not like me moving. Technology, you know what they say about it. Great when it works. Okay, so anyhow. I'll come back over here. But, so we're on the North Spanish Trail. Grand Junction is over there, Delta, Fort Uncompahgre. And man, that is fun when they do the reenactments down there, when they come riding in. And it's the reenactors are reenacting the fur trade and the fur routes from the 1820s, 1840s, and they're all dressed in purely authentic garb, and they're coming in on the mules, and they got their burros and some horses. A lot of fun. They do that. At least, I don't know if they did it last year because of COVID. I think they're doing it, they'll be doing it this year. Anyhow, it's worth, if you see that in the newspaper, in the DCI or the Sentinel, or it just pops up on Facebook or whatever social media, highly recommend attending that. Fun place to go for Christmas too. Real fun place to go for Christmas. The old Fort Uncompahgre. So anyhow, with these trails, this was more trade, but I'm sure there were still covered wagons and stuff at some time going that to California. So where the trails are, the Old Spanish Trail, Oregon Trail, California Trail, I'm sure those are the big three that I know of. Along those trails, you're going to have a lot of draft influence, a lot of thoroughbred, and a lot of quarter horse influence. Because these trails, along the trails, you got your cavalry forts. And the cavalry needs horses. And they were riding primarily thoroughbred quarter horse crosses. And they would get away, or the Native Americans would come and steal them. And anyhow, 1900, so we're back in that Wayback Machine, but just a few years before this building was built. In 1900, there were over 2 million wild horses on the plains and across the West. 2 million. After the buffalo had been decimated, there were still 2 million wild horses out there. And now there's maybe 80 to 100,000. And that's at least 3 times more than what the BLM has determined the land that the horses are still on can support. There's appropriate management level. It's basic. And you can help me on this. They take, is it an acre of land, and they
For determining an AUM?
Yeah.
Animal unit lot?
Yeah, and they fence it off so nothing can get in there to eat or.
Actually, a range manager would come in, they have test plots. They come in every year, and they figure out how much grazing there is for the animal. And that's supposed to support a heifer calf unit or 2 sheep. And they've never integrated, what a wild horse would. Now, wild horse will browse on a lot more than what the heifer calf will or the sheep will.
They'll be into the juniper and the sage and rabbit brush and yeah. And so, if you're looking to adopt a Mustang at some point, do not have wood fence. That's first time mistake of a lot of adopters of Mustangs. You'll be like, my Mustang's cribbing. Like, no, he's eating my wood fence. That's on the menu. So sagebrush, juniper, horse manure's on the menu. It's when you look at the horse has got a double gut, but the manure that comes out, there's still 40 to 50% nutrition value left in that manure. And so it's like pate. I mean, it's kind of gross, but that's the way it is out in the wild. And the first, well, this is for domestics too, but the first meal, the first solid meal the foal will have is the mom's manure. After she or he gets a good drink and gets the colostrum in, gets a belly full of milk, and is feeling pretty good. And it could be days or even a couple of weeks, but first solid food that foal is gonna eat is mom's manure. So usually you want to deworm mom like right after she's foaled, so that you get any worms or worms. I mean, it's just another part of, it's a symbiotic relationship that, I mean, even a dewormed animal, or, I mean, we've got so many parasites in our gut too. Most of them are beneficial. Every once in a while there's something bad. And we got more parasites living in our eyebrows than there are people living in New York City. So, you know, it's just, you can sanitize all day you want. It's just, they're, you know, and it's, you know, I take a lunch break, I don't even bother washing my hands, I just sandwich in and keep going. You know, so it's just so much stuff. Some of the healthiest people are those that are working with animals. Now, you can be around an animal that's got some disease and you really got to be careful, but on average, very healthy working with animals, large animals, even small animals. Second healthiest occupation, and I'm probably a lot of people here, if you haven't planted a garden, start gardening. It's one of the best things, not just what's coming out and you eat for dinner, it's getting your hands dirty and just working the soil and being part of Earth. We're all children of this planet. You know, we're standing here on concrete. I used to work at a grocery store. I had enough. I couldn't take 8 to 10 hours a day on a concrete surface. My knees were giving out, my hips were giving out, my ankles were hurting, I was getting grumpy. I was okay with all the pain, I just didn't like me being grumpy. And so I was like, I'm done. And I go 8, 10, 12 hours on my feet with the horses all day long, but it's on the ground. And there's no issue. So, I don't know, garden, horse around, get in nature, go watch birds, go learn how to do bird calls, whatever. Just, God, we live on a beautiful planet. We really do. I mean, wait a minute, let me bring a picture.
So what's the green? What's the shaded area?
Death Valley, Mojave Desert, Grand Canyon, so it's the national parks, Mesa Verde, all of that. So, history. I'm going to open up for questions just for a couple of minutes. I mean, I've just been kind of on a little tirade, but we're half an hour in already. I don't stick to script very well. Anyone questions or interest? You came here, you're interested. I'd like to.
Yeah. I have a question for you. I went to Chesapeake Island and they have wild horses.
The swimming
and they
horses.
sell them off. They sell the babies off. They swim them across and they sell the babies. Why can't BML sell the babies off and then put the rest of the herd back on that land like they do in Chesapeake Island? That's how they manage it in Chesapeake. Why can't we do the same thing here?
Right. There's the main issue right now, I'm speaking BLM, let me wear a BLM hat. Most of the ranges are double or triple or quadruple what the BLM has determined is the appropriate number of horses. So at this point, they're just wanting to pull the horses off. There's a lot of things they're open to once they are at that appropriate level. And in some places, I think the appropriate management level is low. Other places, I think it's high. But again, like we're talking, all that BLM land is all multi-use. There's 20 people that have an interest on that acre. And man, how do you know, it's 20 chiefs and no Indians. It's a rough place to be for the BLM. But I like how they do that there, but it's manageable. Probably the Little Book Cliffs, which is outside Palisade. It's really close, but it's really far away because you got to really have good four-wheel drive to get up in there if it's not raining or snowing. Because just turns into a gumbo mess, and wherever you're at, you're stuck. That's one of the best managed herd areas in the country. They have been utilizing fertility control up there for at least 2 decades, where most places have barely scratched the surface on fertility control or not. And of course, there's 2 or 3 opinions on fertility control. But they have managed to minimize the gathers out of Little Book Cliffs to maybe once a decade. There was 2 in the past decade. One was after horses were just looking thin. I think it was 2019. No, it was 2018 or 17. I gotta check my, anyhow. I think it was 2017. But that's okay. My phone does that to me too. So that was that last gather from Little Book Cliffs was necessary. There wasn't enough forage on the ground to support the horses, but it would be nice if there were enough groups active enough. Like there's a group called the Friends of the Mustangs out of Grand Junction, and they are very, very, very active with those horses up there. There's a level of pride in the Little Book Cliffs that you don't see too many other places. I mean, you look at the roundabouts in Grand Junction, have the copper sculptures of the wild horses, and it's just part of the culture there. And I think it always will be. And I love that. And if more communities would step up, like Grand Junction and Palisade, and Quebec, Wild Horse Days, Quebec, it would be great. There's some interest in Meeker. That's a different story there. Most of the horses outside of Meeker, Piance and East Douglas horses, are mostly ranch horses that were turned out. And the ranchers, that's how they manage their horses. They turn out their horses, and they come up in the spring, and they gather in the 2-year-olds, the 3-year-olds, and then they break them and make them into riding horses, and they ended up with some mighty fine riding stock doing it that way. And then the Wild Horse and Burro Act came in, and it was like, oh, well, we got a lot of horses here. There's some angst still with the old ranchers and the BLM up there, because the ranchers were like, BLM just stole all our horses.
Yeah.
So there's such a dynamic from one horse management area to another. And then further north, we've got San Wash Basin, and that's where Picasso is from, and his Michelangelo and his lineage. This gorgeous paint, Pinto. He's a wild horse, so he's a Pinto. Gorgeous Pinto. And he lived to be 30 years out in the wild. And he just disappeared, and they never found his body, but it just disappeared. 30 years in the wild.
That was Picasso?
Picasso. Yeah, the last they saw him, I think, was in 2019. But, so there's a big following there, and the San Wash Basin is like the photographer's mecca. Every wildlife and wild horse photographer goes there. And I think it's because they're really easy to get to. It's just west of Craig, west of Maybell, and then it's the San Wash Basin. Same story though, if it rains, wherever you are, you're stuck until things dry out. It doesn't matter if you have a Humvee or what, you're stuck. Yes, sir.
So how is fertility control used? How do you apply it?
The primary way they're doing now is they're darting the mares in the wild. They use a CO2 projectile rifle. The challenge is it has a range of about the length of this room. And so you've got to set up to where usually the best thing to do is to have to be up in a tree stand or in a blind, by where you know where the horses are coming to drink. They got to drink once a day, sometimes twice a day. So that's the most, or if you know there's primary game pass that they're using or whatever, some places are easier than others. If you're looking at places in Nevada, there's no hills, there's no nothing, it's just flat for 20 miles. And the horse's eyes are way better than ours. Way better than ours. They can see us coming from miles away. That's going to be difficult. The other way they're doing it is they will actually round up the horses into large pens, sort the stallions out, dart the mares while they're in the pen, and then send them out.
What does the dart do?
The dart, dart them in their hindquarters. There's 2 or 3 different birth control. PZP is the primary one. There's Gonacon, and there's another one coming out, and I think there's a 4th one. But basically what PZP does, the mare still cycles. This is what I like about PZP is they still cycle, but the sperm from the stallion cannot penetrate the egg. So she still has all the mare, still goes through cycles, still can be mounted by a stallion, still everything is, stallion thinks the same, as just no baby comes out. It's about 80 to 90% effective. So it cuts down on the births, and that's good. Gonacon is the other one. It actually stops the mare from cycling, so she doesn't go into heat, and it's kind of the jury's still out on Gonacon. They're trying Gonacon in Piancese Douglas. They're using PZP on Little Book Cliffs, and they're using PZP out in Sandwash Basin. So it'll be interesting where the Gonacon comes. Does that answer your question?
How long does it last? Application.
PZP is an initial and then a booster 2 weeks later. That's the biggest challenge with that. You've got to find the mare you darted and hit her again. Kind of like getting the COVID booster shot. You know, some people are getting it, some, I'm just, boy, there's a can of worms. So that's the big challenge. With Gonacon, you dart her once and it's good for 2 years. That's the upside, but it could really affect herd behavior. Are the stallions going to abandon that mare because he thinks she's infertile? You're not going in a heat cycle. Her hiney ain't smelling like it's supposed to every 3 weeks. You know, it could end up you would have, you know, mares just off on their own. And that's a totally different dynamic than we've seen. So that could be the potential downside. I think they want to try it in Piancese Douglas because it's a relatively easy range to monitor. It's not nearly as hard to get to as the Little Book Cliffs, and it doesn't have photographers and everybody crawling all over the place like Sandwash Basin does. So I think that's why they're trying it there. So it'll be interesting to see. Yes?
Left to their own devices, what factors would influence crossbreeding between different strains of horses?
Crossbreeding or inbreeding. And that's a concern too when you don't have, you know, there's an X number of horses to remain genetically viable, and some of these herds are smaller than that. The BLM will introduce new mares in from other ranges to help kind of alleviate that. The stallions, just basically, their mares are their mares until they, and they send off their boys quicker than they do their girls. Most of the colts are sent packing by the time they're a year old before they can even breed. So, you know, colt isn't going to be breeding mom or sister. Hopefully, but anyhow, it happens. I'm sure it happens out there. And that's a concern.
I guess I was thinking more of crossbreeding, that, you know, this type of horse would mate with this type and you get a different strain.
Well, like you get a quarter horse breeding with a Clyde, well, that happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
you'll end up a
factor.
much draftier horse breeding with a thinner, smaller, that's got some Arabian influences in there or whatever. So yeah, that happens. I mean, again, it all depends on the mare, who she's gonna accept mounting her. And it could be worrisome if you've got a 1,400-pound, heavy draft influenced stallion mounting a 550-pound mare that, you know.
So if they're in proximity to different
Yeah.
types of
And
horses, they're fine
it's-
with each other.
Yeah, and it's just a blend of everything out there.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, our Morgans are gonna be over here, and our quarter horses are gonna be here.
But you called Romeo one specific type.
Romeo is drafty, he's definitely got Clydesdale influence in him, when you see. And again, when you look at where the San Wash Basin is, that's along the Oregon Trail. So you would have had Clydesdales and drafts. And there's a big curly influence up there too, the curly horses. And they're big, massive, big bone horses too. They don't shed, they're hypoallergenic. You're allergic to horses, you can get a curly and you'll be fine. They're like the poodle of the horse world.
George, I got a different question.
Yes.
You know, one thing, these are a wild animal, like you said.
Some of these lines have been out there, you know, like you said, they've been out there a lot longer than what we've been giving credit, which, you know, give or take, you know.
You can at least go into the 1600s,
Right,
1500s.
1604, you know, when the Navajo overthrew the Mexican, or the Spanish at the time. But the thing that always gets me is, you got a wild animal, it's been out there, it's never seen a human. We bring them into the gather, and, you know, when you start going through the gentling process, they want, you know, for some reason, there is some kind of relationship between our species and there, because you try to bring an elk in,
Yeah,
he's never gonna like you.
no.
He's, you know,
Good luck trying to ride a moose.
yeah. But
Although I have a horse about as big as a moose.
But the horse, it's funny, you got an animal that has never seen a human, and they're curious about us.
They have a level, there's something, and again, it goes way back. I mean, it goes back to Greek and where the heck was before the Greeks? I mean, you got, you know, you're talking, like I said earlier, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for the horse. And we've been riding horses for thousands of years. I mean, one man on a horse with a pike could devastate 50 men on the ground. I mean, it's such a force multiplier, military-wise, work-wise. I mean, a horse burrows, I mean, you want something to work. Boy, those little guys can just, 400-pound burrow can outwork a horse. They're amazing little creatures. But it's, I mean, literally, we would not be where we are today without the horse. And we've forgotten that. I mean, for thousands of years, our history up until about 1910 is nothing without the horse. The dog, you know, the original wolf. I mean, it's still even that way with wild wolves. You bring in these wolves into sanctuaries, and they're willing to become domesticated. I mean, you're still talking a wolf that's 140 pounds that could flatten the strongest man in this room out. But there's that, wolves are pack orientated, and I think it's a social structure there. And elk are herd orientated too. I don't know whether we're in that theory, but it's just, there's just something, there are certain animals on this world you're like, what part is evolution and what part is creation? Whoever your belief of a greater being is. There are certain, the horse and the dog, and the horse and the wolf are the prime examples. And it's just like, man, they just want to be a part of our life. And the kinder you are to them, the kinder they are to you. And the more willing they are to work with you and help you. You know, so it's, man, we're blessed by the horse, we're blessed by the dog. So, did that answer the question? I don't know.
Yeah, just going in, you get to work with them a lot more.
Oh, I tell you what, people come out, I walk into the herd. I've got 24 from what I would say fully now domesticated, fully gentle, fully friendly, to those that still don't want to be touched. And they're all together. And I walk out there with them. I feel that's the safest place in the world for me, is among those 24 wild horses. Semi-wild, cupcakes, wild. I feel way safer there than I do walking through Walmart. Especially the Walmart parking lot. But they're just, they are, I don't know, there's still magic in the horse.
Now, have you gotten up to Landers where we have the prison?
My brother lives in Lander.
Okay.
He was a forest ranger up in Lander. He's
Okay.
retired.
The prison program we have.
Yeah, and that's, Mantle. Mantle's the guy, the lead that does out of what's the next town over from Lander?
Oh,
Riverton.
Yeah.
Isn't it out of Riverton or is it in Lander?
It
It's
is, the
Riverton.
prison's
Yeah.
actually, we
Yeah.
always just found that the field office is out of Landers.
Yeah, and they got a prison wild horse inmate program in Canyon City too. If you want to, I think it's on Amazon Prime, it's probably on Netflix. If you have a chance, watch Wild Horse Redemption. It goes deep into the prison program.
Was
It's
that a
filmed-
documentary or?
Documentary. It was a documentary.
There's a movie
It's
about.
Mustang. Yeah, and that
Yeah.
was filmed Northern Nevada Correctional
Okay.
Facility, and Robert Redford's behind that.
Yeah.
And then there's another movie, Robert Redford. It just came out. One's called The Mustang, and the other one's Mustangs. So there's Mustang and Mustangs. But Wild Horse Redemption is a documentary, and it is like, wow. And the work that these horses are doing on these inmates
Yeah.
is amazing. The work these wild horses can do with children is amazing. I'm partnering with Grand Valley Horse Rescue, and they're outside of Fruita. It actually started up children. It is the first, the board members, adult supervision, but the children are running the outfit. And I'm partnering with them to get some of my sweeter Mustangs to them so that the kids can grow up with a Mustang in their life. And their goal is for those horses to be available to children that don't have access to horses otherwise, which is cool because more and more, 82% of America lives in the suburbs and cities. They're not lucky like us. They think that. Anyhow, we'll never go back to Los Angeles. But for children to have access to a horse and grow up with that horse, that was my life. I grew up with a horse. I mean, my dad had me on a horse. I wasn't even walking yet. I was on horseback. Even as a year and a half, still crawling, maybe stumbling, not really walking, but to be on a horse and just, instead of being down here, now I'm over here. That's something. And then I was fortunate. I grew up west of Delta, almost on the rim of the Rubidoux Canyon. And I had a horse and a burro. Old Ed, he came with property. He didn't trust adults for anything, but man, did he love kids. He would kneel down, and I couldn't even get on his back because when I was there, I was only in 2nd grade. So he would kneel. He was like a mammoth burro, and he would kneel down, and I could swing a leg over his neck, and then he would stand up, and I'd slide down. An adult would show up, and he's like, "Gotta go." And so how do you explain something like that? I didn't know a damn thing about burros back then. I was 2nd grade. So, and then I had Taffy, who was a retired barrel racer. And she barrel raced for a friend of the family. And then she came to me all the way through high school. And then she went to another friend of the family and helped raise that girl from 5th grade through high school. She lived to be 32 years old. Raised 3 kids. It's magic. Everybody should be raised by a horse. But I'm just speaking from my own experience. because everyone has their own experiences and their own beliefs, but they are just a phenomenal being. Yes, ma'am?
How often are the wild horses caught, and where do they take them?
Okay, so how often are they caught? It all depends. Like last year in Colorado, they pulled 650 or so off of San Wash Basin, and they pulled 450 off of the West Douglas, which isn't even really a legitimate considered wild horse area, so they tried to get them all off of it. That's over 1,000 horses. They're sitting in Canyon City within the state penitentiary. So, and that's kind of a double-edged sword. So you have the state working with the federal government to house 2,000 or 3,000 horses, which is wonderful because the prison can probably do it at a much more affordable cost than anybody else could, because labor's free, prison, or relatively free. I mean, I don't think it, but you know, the prisoners are getting horse handling experience, which is great. They train horses, they get adopted out. It's great. It is reforming the recidivist, I cannot say that word. Them going back to prison after they've been in the wild horse program is about half of other prisoners. And a lot of them have gotten jobs, ranch hands, have gone on to be horse trainers, have worked somewhere, you know, as a vet tech or something with horses. And so it's an amazing, successful program. They have it there, they have the one up in Riverton, they have it in Nevada, they're, I think, Hutchinson, Kansas. I mean, it's a huge success. On the flip side, when you are a law-abiding citizen and you want to go into prison, it's easier to break the law to get into prison than it is to legally get into prison. You have to pull up, your car is searched, you have to leave your phone, your camera, anything. They frisk you, they make sure that you don't have a toothpick that you can poke somebody's eye out with. It is a full security check. And then you go to the designated place and they show you the horses that are available for adoption that day, and it might be 30 or 40. You don't get to see the other 3,000 horses. Whereas if I was to go to Rock Springs, and they have a couple thousand horses up there, I can go and see every single horse. And I can have an eye, and I'm really interested in that horse. And more importantly, it's like, oh look, that horse is really interested in me. Makes life a lot easier. When you got a horse that's already lashing onto you, already connecting with you, and those are the smart ones. They're like, you know, I'm tired of jail. Can I go home with you? So it's just, there's good and bad with the prison programs. It's just hard to get in and to see all the horses. Did that answer the question? It can be anywhere from yearly to once every 10 years. It depends as far as gathering the horses up. It depends on the range and how well that range is managed. It also depends on drought conditions. I mean, if there's no water, nothing's growing, and everything burns. We've been through that for 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's been crazy. And that's been the other challenge. Between the big Estes Park fire and that fire that was between, whatever that was almost 200,000, 185,000 acres outside of Quebec. So you had Little Book Cliffs here, big fire here, and then Piance East Douglas above that. 185,000 acres burned. Where did the elk and the deer and the mountain sheep and goats and all the other critters go? Some went towards Little Book Cliffs, some went up to the, so now you've got more demand each way. And then me, I'm feeding the horses that have been gathered already, that are at my place. And the cattle that used to graze there and the sheep that used to graze there have all been pulled back. And now they're eating hay, and it's a drought year. And so we're already short on hay, and so hay costs have gone from $6 a small bale to $12 a small bale. From $150 a ton to over $300 a ton. And this year has been better. Whew. And if we get another snow like we did the end of December, we'll be good for this year. So that's, but there's so many variables that play into it, and every place is different. So, yes.
I'm fairly new to the area. I'm familiar with the book cliffs. The little book cliffs, is that close to the Beck herd?
Yes, that's Quebec. So you can either go to Quebec and go up that way and get up on the top, or you can go up the bottom route up through
We saw quite a few horses in the Beck.
where the old power plant was, where the new shooting range is. Cameo, yeah, you can go up through Cameo for the lower
What's the
area.
name of
That's
that
what I wanted
place?
to
You
know.
say it so fast. How do you spell that? It sounds like Little Cliffs.
Little Book Cliffs, yep.
That's right.
Little, small
Cliffs.
cliffs. Cliffs,
Cliffs.
yeah. Little Book
The
Cliffs.
Beck herd, is it not? The Beck wild horse herd.
And when you're up by those cliffs, there's nothing little about them. They're pretty serious. But yeah, it is gorgeous. If anybody, I highly recommend if you can get up there. It does take a real four-wheel drive. I mean, a four-wheel drive pickup can get up there, a Jeep or something like that. But if you've got a crossover, you ain't gonna make it. Yes,
I went on a tour up there about 4 years ago with the friends of the Mustangs
right.
out of Grand Junction. They had, I don't remember how many vehicles there were,
Yeah.
but went back up in there and saw lots of horses.
It's gorgeous country up there.
Fabulous, and seeing the animals was just a highlight of my life.
It is. Okay, now you just get to see me scroll through my pictures.
So where are you located, George?
I'm in Eckerd. Basically hang a ride at the church, go a quarter mile, hang a ride at the dead poplar, and you're there. That's another thing, water.
Yeah.
Everything around here, they've taken all the irrigation and put it into pipelines. So it's underground, so there's no evaporation. Guess how many trees had tap roots going into that? We got trees dying left and right everywhere. I am looking for little book cliffs.
I was gonna ask you if they still do tours.
They
It was a fundraiser that I
They do. I don't think they did last year because of COVID. Possibly. So this is up on the Little Book. This is the Little Book Cliffs. The Appaloosa's Traveler. He's my buddy. I've been up on the Little Book Cliffs probably 24 times. I'd be up there more. It just takes 3 hours to get up there from here. It's an hour to get to the back, and then 2 hours from the back to get, and then you got 2 hours to get down. So there's 6 hours out of your day going. I have seen him every time I've been up there, Traveler. We know each other. It's crazy. And again, you talk about that connection. And I won't get any closer than from me to you. He's a stallion. But we have taken walks together. And we have just gone and just done our walkabouts. And there's 2 or 3 other people that he's open enough to going on walks with. And again, it's that connection. He will always be on the Little Book Cliffs because he has an Appaloosa. They want to maintain his bloodlines. And now there's like 2 or 3 other Appaloosas up there that are all his children. So anyhow, he's just one. I just wanted to share this because it does have the book cliffs up behind him. And that's one of his mirrors, and I cannot remember her name.
Did you name him or who named him?
No, someone out of Friends of the Mustangs named him. If you remember the Friends of the Mustangs, they go up as a group every spring, and they'll try and get a full count. And then you remember, and then they do drawings for names of the new foals. So it's kind of fun. But
Can you look at Traveler and know he's an Appaloosa?
yeah, he's got a white blanket.
That's it, that's what tells you.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Yeah.
Plus the eyes.
Appaloosa, the eyes, they normally will have a shorter tail too. They just don't get that long all the way down to the ground tail. Usually have a shorter tail, although his blows my theory, his is all the way down to the ground. But their eyes will usually be a little smaller, a little more inset. And a lot of times they'll have smaller, tighter ears. But he's got a pretty good set of ears.
And they want to keep him separate from other types of horses.
They just, he can do whatever he wants to do. He's going to stay, he will not be gathered. He's on the do not gather list. If he does get pulled into, a helicopter comes along and drives him into the corrals and stuff, if he comes in, they will sort him and turn him out. Because they want, the BLM has been listening, and again, they're trying to take care of themselves too. If an Appaloosa does become adoptable, there's going to be a bidding war on him. He's probably a $10,000, if he was to come off, he'd be a $10,000 horse. Just blind bids, nobody has even seen that horse. I mean, they have an internet auction, and they bring up some of the most beautiful horses you've ever seen. We have no idea if their conformation's any good. You don't know if they're even open to trainable or whatever. They just look sexy and flashy, and boop, 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 up goes the price. Because otherwise, her plain sorrel, you can get them for $25 a piece.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So. But it's just like everything else. You want a Ford or do you want a Ferrari as far as looks? Me, I'll take the Ford. Yes?
We've been up on the book cliffs a couple times with George Dexter.
Uh-huh.
And he told us that when they gather them, they keep the real showy horses and turn them back out.
Yeah,
like the
because they
Appaloosa or
want
the Black Stallion. Because they want people to go, oh my God, the wild horses are so beautiful, and get all kinds of backing to the wild horses.
Yeah, and it helps. And again, it's such a well-managed herd up there, so it's really good. Other places, you get into East and West Douglas, bay, 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 bay. Oh, look, another bay. And 80% of wild horses are either bay or sorrel, red or brown. And me, I love the bays, I love the sorrels. So. Yes?
What kind of health problems do they have?
Not that many. Stuff, West Nile comes through. You name the list of diseases. I mean, they're still horses. They're susceptible. But their immune systems, it's like shooting Superman with a bullet. I mean, they can still get sick. They get a little snotty nose. Usually when it's that first cold snap where we go from warm and all of a sudden it's cold, half my herd's got a runny nose for 2 or 3 days. And then they're fine. They're tough as nails, and they're about as smart as Einstein. A lot of people don't like Mustangs because they are so smart. They haven't had the brains bred out of them. And they do hold you to a higher standard. They'll call bullshit on you. I mean, they literally will. And that's a lot where I come in. A lot of people try to train these horses like a domestic. They try and off the shelf, 29 steps to the perfect horse. And there's not a Mustang in that training program. It's all quarter horses, And they get to like step 3 and it's like, the horse is jumping out of the pen, the horse is trying to bite me, the horse is trying to kick me, the horse is running, And it's just like, because you're not listening to the horse. Stop listening to the off-the-shelf stuff. Find somebody that understands Mustang and reach out to them.
So how do you develop rapport with them?
You dance. You dance. There's just, there's no better word to, it's not whispering. You know, it's listening. And it's not, they're not like, hey George, you know, it's not verbal listening, but you're listening at a level of feel. How do you train feel? Somebody teaches Qigong here. That's how you learn feel. You learn Qigong, you learn a martial art, you learn your own Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga, Kung Fu, whatever. But when you learn a martial art, you're learning about you and you're learning about your body. Bruce Lee's a great example. Bruce Lee does stuff that nobody could understand. There's others out there. He's not thinking his way through that fight. He's not thinking he's feeling his way through that. And guys are just dropping by the wayside. It's very similar with a horse. You feel your way through it. And it's not feeling, it's not touchy-feely Hallmark Channel feel. This is gut feel. Trust your gut. Remember that old saying? Trust your gut. All in your gut. I mean, I just do, people are like, why did you go that way with that horse? Because that was what was open to me from that horse.
Well, so they're all about body language.
It's even deep. Body language is the next level down, but it's even deep. It is bioelectric. That's where the feel comes in. Look up heart math studies with horses. They're able to put on electrodes and monitor the horse. What they can monitor in a horse's bioelectric field coming from their heart, from their, is 25 feet both sides of them. Complete sphere. 25 feet is, you know, I'm 6 foot tall. Probably, if a horse was to stand in the middle of this room, they could feel every single one of you. Know that you're worried about your great-grandson. You're worried about, did I leave something on the stove and did my cat get it? You know, or whatever. I'm making stuff up. Those horses are so attuned to what you are feeling, and it's okay. Don't hide it. Some people say leave your problems at the gate and then go in to see your horse. I say be honest with your horse, saying, I'm having a shitty day. My best friend died of COVID 3 days ago. I am having a shitty day. Excuse my French. Horses are fine with my French. But it's just, there's that feel. And then they feel me and I feel them. And you want to know about something powerful. When you get into that herd of 24 horses, each of their electromagnetic fields blending with each other, and that's where the Qigong and the yoga and that stuff comes in. And I'm not really worried about all the chakras and all this. All I know is there's an energy. We all have energy. You watch The Matrix. There's enough energy in the human body to power one human body to provide power for all of Cedaredge. It's untapped, but it's there. Horses are tapping into that. They feel it. They know it. You know a horse has 5 hearts? Fun fact. Big one here, 5 or 6 times bigger than the human heart. Every hoof has a heart. Got to get that blood back up. Elephants have that heart in the hoof. Right? Large animals. I don't know if cows do or not. Probably. But anyhow, it's just a pump. But it all ties in. And you wonder how horses are so good at running. I mean, across Rocky, I have prairie dog holes everywhere. The domestic would probably fall on a trip and break a leg or whatever. But the Mustangs, it's like they can feel the ground. It's like they have ground penetrating radar or sonar or whatever. It's because they have a heart in each hoof. They are feeling that ground. It looks like a hard hoof, but that frog underneath and everything, it's phenomenal how these horses are put together. Yes?
What kind of fencing do you need? Like, you said don't use wooden fencing. Can you use electric fence, or do you have to put like 20-foot fences up?
My front 3 pens are 6 foot high.
Mm-hmm.
They're repurposed drill stem. So they're built at or beyond what the BLM uses in their corrals. And then outside, the top of the property has hot wire across the top, and it bites. And some people are, oh, it goes up the horse. Yeah, you zap the horse, but it startles them, that's it. The safest fence is the one the horse doesn't get into. That's why I like hot wire across the top. And my internal, I have an internal divider, and that's hot wire. And I use the big poly rope, electric braid. If they hit it, it flexes. It's kind of like a bungee cord almost. It's got a lot of flex to it. So it doesn't snap. I mean, the horse hits, you know, a 14 gauge wire, it could snap. But I have yet to see an electric braid snap. It flexes, it gives back in. So it's what I prefer. But until I don't even say that, until they're integrated in the herd, because I still have 2 or 3 horses that aren't handled, and they're out in the herd, and they want to jump a 5-foot fence, they would. They have no reason to, because their friends are here. You know, maybe a mountain lion showed up, but I feel sorry for the mountain lion in 24 Mustangs. Ain't gonna be pretty. So, yeah, yes.
I always wondered what happens to their health once they're off the range and we domesticate their diet.
And that's a good question. If you take a Mustang that's used to being on 30,000 acres, the little Wood Cliffs or whatever, thousands upon thousands of acres, and you bring them into a domestic, say you're boarding them at a barn, and they're in a 10 by 20 stall, and they get turned out for 1 hour a day. I don't know what that's going to do for their physical health, but I know what it's going to do for their mental health. They ain't made that way. I mean, it happens.
They're not foraging like they would.
No, and even the foraging, I'll feed 2 or 3 times a day. I've done hay nets over the 1-ton bales, bringing in with a tractor and the horses. The problem is, even with the slow feeders, I've got Mustangs, you don't want them to overeat. And a Mustang is used to about half the water and half the hay that a domestic is used to. And people are like, your horses aren't drinking water. I'm like, they drink about 5 gallons, that's all they need. Because they're used to living in desert climates. So they have adapted to that.
Did you keep your son like a grass?
They're on a primarily grass hay. I get my hay from Elmer in Eckerd. Best hay around. If you need horse hay, Elmer's the guy. He's amazing, not to mention he's a saint. We need more Elmers in the world. But anyhow, mostly grass. A couple of hard keepers, I can mix maybe 20 or 30% alfalfa. But primarily grass. Mustangs want to move. They don't need 20,000 acres. But if they have 5 or 10 acres and they can move and they can run and they can just be horses, they're really happy. So.
Are there many wild mules?
Very few mules, just on account of there aren't that many ranges out there that have both Mustangs and burros. Most of the places there are burros are in Arizona, and there are no wild horses. There are a few places I've seen 2 or 3 Mustang mules, but they're very, very rare.
What would be an example of calling you on your dishonest in your bush?
That's good, because if you push them too hard and they say no, that's when, they say you need a 6-foot fence to keep them from jumping out. reason they're trying to jump out is because you're pushing them too hard. Or they'll turn and fight you. Mustangs will, you know, most domestics will flee. Most Mustangs will flee too, but you've got 20 or 30% of your Mustangs that are fighters. Option to flee is no longer an option. They're going to turn and fight you. Bite, strike, kick. And usually that's just because you have pushed them too hard. You're asking too much too soon. Very similar to dating in middle school. Very similar. If I would have known what I know now from wild horses, my dating life in middle school and high school would have been a lot better because I would have listened to women better. I have learned more from mares about how to be kind to women than I did as a young man. So that again is why I'm saying kids would be a lot better if they grew up with horses than if they were playing the Xbox, the PlayStation, or on their iPad all day. They're phenomenal. And they know when you're having a bad day. I've had a horse that I couldn't even connect with, and I lost a friend. It wasn't to COVID, but he committed suicide. I was crushed. It's a guy that built my corrals. Every time I go out there and look at my corrals, I think of him. He's dead. He was 20 years younger than me, committed suicide. And that was like 3 months into COVID. I was crushed. And one of the horses that really didn't want to have much to do with me came up and just stood with me and held space. They knew I was hurting. There's a depth to these Mustangs that, man, I just wish I could find a way to share with more people. So I have a feeling I'm probably blabbing and I'm way past my... What time is it?
7:20.
Okay, we're in the bonus rounds. Yes?
So you said you wish that you could share with more people. Do you have any programs that you do at your place? Or are you on the road? I'm new. So
Right.
area, so.
I would like... My heart is with veterans. My brother's a veteran. He's a Green Beret. Served 42 years. They found every excuse to keep him in until he turned 60. 3 months before 60, and they're like, we can't re-up you for 3 months. Sorry, you got to retire. 2 months before he retired, his son graduated jump school, and he was able to put the blood wings on him. Basically, you get your wings and somebody in the command. They stick, literally, they pin them to your chest, literally, and you bleed. But father, son. And so now William was a ranger, and now he's going to Army flight school, and he's going to be flying egg beaters, helicopters. So my dad was in World War II. I can trace every war since the Revolutionary War. World War II and on the Brauneis side, on the Stafford side, which is my mom, all the way back to the Revolutionary War, Civil War, you name it, Spanish-American War. Anyhow, I have a heart for the veterans. And the Mustangs have a heart for the veterans too. There's a lot of parallels. Because veterans go into this situation where their lives depend on your brother or sister next to you. Just like a Mustang's life depends